come to a standing position into what's called Tadasana. Tadasana means mountain pose. And basically mountain pose is just standing with strong posture. But I'm going to break this apart a little bit because this is an extremely important pose. When you feel comfortable with this pose, then you'll notice that all the other poses become much simpler because aspects of Tadasana, mountain pose, show up in all other yoga poses. So let's take a few minutes here to break this apart a bit. We're going to begin with our foundation. So in yoga, you always want to pay attention, and actually really in any exercise, but since we're speaking specifically about yoga, you always want to pay attention to what's in contact with the mat and make sure that that's in alignment first, because that's your foundation. So that's going to be our feet. And what we want here is our feet right under our hip bones, and we want the sides of our feet to be parallel. So a lot of times we get in the habit of standing goofy like this. Our feet are either too narrow or too wide, and we don't have the proper alignment. And that can wreak havoc on the rest of our body because then everything gets out of alignment here. So make sure that not only when you're in yoga, but just when you're standing in line or washing dishes, that you get your feet in the proper placement. Now once that's intact, we're going to move up our body and focus on our inner thighs. I want you to pretend like you have a small ball or a yoga block between your inner thighs and you're gently squeezing that apparatus. What we want to feel is inner thigh engagement, because when our inner thighs are engaged, that helps us activate our core and takes pressure off our lower back. So the more we can activate and strengthen our inner thighs, the better our body's going to feel. Moving on up, we're going to pay attention to what's going on here with our rib cage and our pelvis. I'm going to turn to the side so you can see something. I have a really big curve in my lower back, which you may be able to see here. And so before I was introduced to what's known in yoga as Uddiyana Bandha, whenever you hear the word bandha, that always means lock. Uddiyana Bandha is your rib cage to pelvic lock. Before I was introduced to that, I actually threw my lower back out multiple times during a yoga practice. Once I learned about Uddiyana Bandha, however, I have never since thrown my back out. So this is a really important piece to pay attention to. So right here, I don't have the lock in place. I've got a really big lower back curve. In order to get that lock in place, I have to drop my tailbone and adjust the position of my pelvis. So you can see the difference. Here it's not in place. Here I'm locked up. So in almost every single yoga pose, whether you're on the mat, you're standing, you're balancing, doesn't matter. Even when you're stretching, it's important to have Uddiyana Bandha, your rib cage to pelvic lock in place in order to keep your lower back safe. So working our way up our body, now we're going to make sure our chest is open. A lot of what we do in our everyday life is in front of us. We drive, we cook, we are on the computer, and if we're not mindful, what happens is the muscles in our chest, known as our pectoral muscles, get really tight and very aggravated. And then our upper back muscles, the space between our shoulder blades, those muscles get long and aggravated. And in order to balance that all out and decrease pain, decrease aggravation, we want to open up. So whenever you're doing yoga, you want to make sure your shoulders are pulling back and down. We want to create as much space between our shoulders and our ears as possible. That's not only going to allow our upper body to relax and release, but also when our shoulders are down, that helps our core fire up. So in other words, if our shoulders are up here in any pose, it's really hard for our abdominal muscles to engage in a way that really supports us. So once again, the more space you can create between your shoulders and your ears in Tadasana and in pretty much any yoga posture, the better it's going to feel and the safer it's going to be. Finally, we want to make sure the back of our neck is long. So instead of having our chin jut out and our ears forward, we want to see if we can back it up a little bit Ears ideally over our shoulder, chin tucked just slightly so that the crown of our head is pulling towards the ceiling. And when you're standing in Tadasana pose, we want to make sure not to lock our joints, but instead have little micro bend in places like our knees to keep our joints safe. So instead of having really rigid posture, we're just holding ourselves almost like with a sense of dignity. And I always like to, if I'm just standing in line or something like that, to gently open my palms. That helps me just automatically get my upper body in a proper position. It's also just a nice prompt for me to get into my strong Tadasana posture. So once again, when you get the aspects of Tadasana really solid within you, then not only do you know how to hold yourself in a functional way, which is going to help you decrease pain, but you also are going to find that these aspects show up throughout our yoga practice in many different poses.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you found this content helpful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Also, if you're wondering how to become healthier, I've created a free masterclass for you that is truly your ultimate wellness guide. It's called Fit and Fabulous for Life, 7 secrets that'll help you find your healthy living sweet spot. If you're intrigued, you should see a link to it on your screen now. You'll also find a link to it in the description box of this video. Thanks again for tuning into this video, and I hope you'll consider checking out my free Fit and Fab masterclass.